Good evening, everyone. Thank you again for coming out for another Hump Day History. Hump Day History is intended to get you over the midweek hurdle with a little bit about our region's past. Every Wednesday at 7 p.m. for the month of April and May, and include also most of June, the Thunder Bay Museum will be bringing you live broadcasts from local historians as well as behind-the-scenes looks at the museum's collections. These free, live, and interactive webinars are brought to you on behalf of the Thunder Bay Historical Museum Society and Lakehead University. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items that I'd like to remind everyone who has joined us for the first time. While you had to provide a name and email address to access this webinar, this information is not being stored after the session is over. These webinars are live and not being recorded. Your audio is automatically disabled by default, and at no time is video or your computer screen accessible by the moderator, presenters, or others taking part. Questions can be asked by moving your mouse to the bottom of your screen. There you'll see some buttons for interaction and asking questions. The moderator will keep track of them, and they will be answered at the end. We apologize if we do not get to all of them. If at any time you do have a question that we didn't get to, or you think of something afterwards, please feel free to email info@thunderbaymuseum.com, and our curator will be more than happy to answer them. Please keep in mind that this is an evolving initiative, so there may be a few hiccups along the way. I'd like to begin today's webinar by acknowledging the original custodians of this land and pay my respect to the elders, past, present, and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture, and the hopes of Indigenous peoples. I would also like to recognize that the Thunder Bay Museum is on the traditional land of the Fort William First Nation, signatory to the Robinson-Superior Treaty of 1850, and to acknowledge the role of the Métis settlement in the development of our community. So tonight, our curator, Michael deJong, will explore ship models at the Thunder Bay Museum. So take it away, Michael.
Thank you, Michelle. Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us on another installment of A Night at the Museum, where we take a look at objects in the Thunder Bay Museum's collection that are often not on display. A subject for tonight is ship models. We have a great many in the museum. We're only going to be able to scratch the surface of the collection tonight, but I hope it's a good representation of the kind of the ships that are important to this region. Of course, maritime themes are hugely important to us on the shore of Thunder Bay at the Lakehead. Both regarding industry and passengers, they have a huge part of our history. So let's just dive right in. So as with most things, we're going to start right at the beginning. So the ship you can see is a schooner that would, of the type that would have been operated by the Northwest Company in the early 19th century. So of course, our area's development traces back to the fur trade extensively. I mean, hugely critical to the development of this region. At first, the trade was largely local, featuring furs harvested here in northwestern Ontario, with the local Anishinaabe as middlemen in that trade. Of course, as demand for beaver pelts increased in Europe and local sources declined, the Lakehead became a transshipment point for voyageurs traveling further and further into Western Canada, particularly to the Athabasca area. So as I'm sure many of you are familiar, the transshipment had two main modes, one of which was from Lachine through the upper Lake Nipissing, Sault Ste. Marie, using the 36-foot canoe de Maitre. And then at Grand Portage and later Fort William, the goods were transferred onto 26-foot canoe du Nord. But while these canoes are, of course, our primary image of the Northwest Company fur trade, some of it, particularly on Lake Superior, was actually done by schooners such as these. So private shipping begun on the Great Lakes around 1791, and the Northwest Company began to build schooners near what is now Sault Ste. Marie. Remember that the Soo locks, of course, wouldn't be complete till much later. So that was an obstacle, of course, although the Northwest Company would eventually build a primitive canal around the rapids for their own vessels. Some of these early schooners included the Mink, the Otter, the Perseverance, and the Recovery. It's not entirely clear either from the ship itself, there's no name on it, or from our catalog card which particular one this is meant to be, but I'm assuming it's simply meant to be an archetype of the sort of ships that the Northwest Company used on Lake Superior. So one of these was the Perseverance. This ship was actually built by the XY Company, which was a short-lived offshoot of the Northwest Company from about 1899 to 1799 to 1804, of which Alexander Mackenzie was involved. But these two companies merged in 1804, and the ship became part of the Northwest Company fleet. This ship was actually reconstructed in the 1980s by Old Fort William based on available info. Of course, there's no surviving exact plans for these ships, but they based it on the information they had available. One of the more interesting ships of this type was the Recovery, which, unlike the Perseverance, which was destroyed by the Americans in the War of 1812, this ship actually survived by being hidden at Isle Royal. It had its mast removed. It was covered with spruce and pine boughs, and yeah, it survived the war to trade again afterwards. I've heard a reference to this ship actually running the rapids at Sault Ste. Marie, but I haven't found any more references to that. But that's certainly an interesting aspect of its history as well, that it survived that treacherous route. So the Northwest Company and the Hudson's Bay Company merged in 1921, after which Fort William declined in importance as trade routes shifted to the rivers flowing into Hudson's Bay. So all of these schooners became, of course, operated by the Hudson's Bay Company. The Recovery was replaced in 1823 by the Recovery II, which was actually built at Fort William itself. And it actually appears on a sketch by Lord Selkirk from 1816 in its infancy. So this ship, again, we were past the point at which Lake Superior was a major fur trade route, but this ship served as Lieutenant Henry Bayfield's supply ship for a survey to determine the exact boundary between British and American territory from Lake Superior to Lake of the Woods, which followed the Treaty of Ghent that ended the War of 1812 some years earlier. Of course, the ship did not itself travel between Lake Superior and Lake of the Woods. That would have been impossible, but it was simply a supply ship on Lake Superior. On completion of this survey, the ship was abandoned because, and I'm quoting from Jean Morrison's Superior Rendezvous Place, "The sailors were a great pest to us at Fort William, their idle, dissolute habits interfering with the regular ones of our establishments, owing to the liquor served out to the former." And that sort of ended an era of Northwest Company and Hudson's Bay Company schooners on Lake Superior. So I'm going to show a few slides now. The first is actually a black and white sketch. And it's a sketch that's a view of Fort Kaministiquia. Of course, this is from 1805. The fort was not renamed after William McGillivray until 1807. And it's just a black and white sketch that shows one of the schooners docked right at the fort, the Welcome Dock as they refer to it, along with another one in the water, as well as various canoes. So it's just a fairly representative picture of what some of the traffic would have looked like at Fort William with both canoes and schooners being there. The next slide shows, it doesn't actually show one of the schooners, but it was painted in 1811 by Lieutenant Irvine, who was master of the Northwest Company schooner Caledonia. And I just included it because it's a fairly a nice sketch, and again, it shows that schooners were becoming integral to trade with Fort William at that time period. I don't have a lot of info on the Caledonia. It doesn't show up in some of the lists that I've seen of Northwest Company ships. So I'm going to do a little more digging into that for sure. This too is a copy that we have in our collection of a painting at another institution. So I'm going to move on now, going a little further forward in history to the Sidewheeler Algoma, as you should see on the camera coming up soon. I say it's a Sidewheeler Algoma because, of course, it is a sidewheeler, but also to differentiate it from the more modern and more famous steamship Algoma, which I will say more about later. So this is one of a fairly large collection of our ship models that was built by Earl Smith and donated to the museum back in the 1970s. So this ship was built in 1840. It was initially called the City of Toronto. After several changes in ownership, it became the Algoma, and it ran from Collingwood to Fort William, which was a very common route from southern Ontario to the Lakehead, and that started in 1865, sorry. Its captain was Thomas Leach. And this ship is perhaps best known for being one of the 3 ships that transported soldiers on the Wolseley expedition in 1870 to quell the Red River Rebellion in Manitoba. The other 2 ships were the Shikora and the Francis Smith, and again, I'll say more about them later. So on their way to transport soldiers to Prince Arthur's Landing, these ships became involved in what is now known as the Shikora incident at the Sioux Locks. Now, at the time, the Sioux Locks were on the American side of the border, so we were largely at their mercy in terms of passage. The Algoma had already passed, but the Shikora was actually held up by the Americans, who decided to disallow Canadian military traffic. So this went on for several weeks, where the Shikora was just laid up and unable to go forward. Finally, diplomatic intervention allowed this ship passage, but of course this delayed Colonel Wolseley's arrival at Prince Arthur's Landing by several weeks. But this incident did eventually lead to the creation of locks on the Canadian side of the border, obviously to avoid this sort of thing going forward. We do actually have a model of the Shikora in our collection as well. It's on display right now in our multi-purpose room, which is where we have our lectures, as well as we rent it out for various events. So I'm going to move on to a few slides now about some of these ships. So first is a sketch of the Algoma. Obviously, as you can see, it's on some rough seas, passing Thunder Cape on its way to Prince Arthur's Landing. From Prince Arthur's Landing, of course, the expedition went on via the Dawson route to the Red River settlement, which wasn't an easy task at the time. Remember, this is well before the railroad. This effectively ended the rebellion there without any shots fired. The next slide is of the Shikora. Like I said, we do have a model of it here as well. This doesn't show, the information I have about this photo doesn't say exactly where it is, but it does appear to be somewhere on Lake Superior's north shore. The Shikora actually has a very interesting history. It was actually a blockade runner during the Civil War, helping trade goods to get from the Confederate States to Great Britain, avoiding the Union blockade. Of course, at the time, there were some sympathies between the British Empire and the Confederacy, which is a fascinating subject in and of itself. This likely was probably a factor in why the American government held her up in the Sioux for several weeks. After the war, the Shikora went back to serving the route between Collingwood and Fort William, like the Algoma, and later was on the route between Toronto and Queenston. The last slide is of the Francis Smith, which was also involved in the journey. It's fairly interesting in its own right, but due to limited time, I can't say too much about it. It was the 3rd ship carrying troops in the Wolseley expedition. Interestingly enough, I know this from working on another exhibit in partnership with St. Joseph's Care Groups last year. This was the ship that carried the Sisters of St. Joseph to Port Arthur, where they established the hospital that grew into what St. Joseph's Care Group is now. The last slide is, of course, of the more famous Algoma, the steamship Algoma, a more modern ship. Again, just briefly, she was part of the Canadian Pacific Fleet. Famously, this ship sank off of Isle Royal in 1885 with 46 lives lost, one of the more notable tragedies of Lake Superior shipping. And again, there's plenty of information on the SS Algoma, but I thought I would focus on the lesser known Algoma tonight instead. So I'm going to go back to the artifact camera, and we're going to focus now on the SS Erin. So the Erin was a fairly utilitarian, nondescript ship. Often she was described as a barge. But this ship plays a very important role in the development of Thunder Bay. She was built at St. Catharines, my hometown, What I assume was at Chicluna Shipyard, so I'm not 100% on that, but she was definitely built in St. Catharines in 1883. She was 174 feet long, and she had the honor to be the first ship to load grain at the lakehead. So under the command of Captain J. Clifford, she took on 10,000 bushels of wheat from Manitoba at Thomas Marks's dock at the foot of Arthur Street in 1883. So remember, the CPR had just been completed between Manitoba and Fort William. The Canadian Pacific route north of Lake Superior would take several more years. And of course, this was before elevators were built. So in this case, loading was done directly from boxcars onto the ship via wheelbarrows. Of course, several years later, the Canadian Pacific elevator would be constructed in Port Arthur, the first of a great many, thus allowing grain to be stored at the lakehead before being loaded on ships. But again, the Erin marked the very beginning of a major chapter in the history of the lakehead. It didn't just carry grain. It also played a role in constructing the railway north of Lake Superior, as I just mentioned. There's a reference in the Port Arthur Weekly Herald from May of 1885 that she had grounded the previous winter near Gull Rock while carrying railway ties for the railroad. Of course, she had been left in place for that winter and then rescued and towed into Port Arthur by the tug Kate Williams that spring. So on to some slides. The first you should see coming up soon is the sketch of the SS Erin that we have in our collection. We don't have a great deal of photos of the Erin, photos or paintings either way, but this is one that we have. It's a photo of a painting that, as you can see, has obviously been damaged and repaired. But it shows Erin on her way. The next slide is showing her loading timber in 1905 in Nipigon Bay. This was her other main role. In fact, she was the type of ship that was often referred to as a lumber hooker. In 1906, she met her end sailing in the St. Clair River when she collided with another vessel in the fog. So 5 of her crew went down with her. So a fortunate end to this very small vessel. But again, with a very notable history for this region. So back to the artifact cam. So just give us one sec. So normally, of course, we focus on items of local or regional relevance, but I hope you'll allow me one ship that doesn't really have much local relevance. So this is the HMS Warrior. I decided to focus a bit on her just because I found it really interesting, just because of its significance in the evolution of naval technology in the Victorian era. She was a steam-powered armored frigate built in 1860. So just to set some background here, prior to the mid-19th century, naval technology had been relatively stable. Most of the ships that had been built up to that point were what we refer to as ships of the line. They were called that because of the way that they engaged each other in combat, where they would form themselves in a line and fire at each other towards other ships' broadsides. But everything changed in the mid to late 19th century. Due to a variety of reasons. So explosive shells had been developed, which were used to devastating effect in the Crimea, which led to the need to give ships greater armor to resist these shells. And of course, they had also started to experiment with steam-powered naval ships. So the HMS Warrior, in a way, is a culmination of these 3 developments. So she was built in an arms race between France and England. France had just built La Gloire, the first ocean-going ironclad warship. The Warrior was developed in response to this. She was twice as long and was iron-hulled rather than just wood with iron cladding. I'm going to quickly move on to some slides here. So as a result of the construction of the HMS Warrior, Britain dominated the waves in the decade following. But the Warrior never actually saw active combat. So this first slide is of a painting of the Warrior that shows her under sail. But technology marched on, and within a decade, the Warrior was obsolete. The Monitor and the Merrimack, of course, as many of you are familiar with, now going back to this 1962, had showed the importance of completely ironclad ships. which rendered wooden-hulled naval ships irrelevant, essentially. So this slide is, as you can see, is the HMS Devastation, which was launched in 1871, essentially the successor of the HMS Warrior. As you can see, a very radical change. Most significantly, of course, is the development of turrets with guns that could change direction. But this came at a cost of removing mass to allow auxiliary sail power. So the Warrior had a relatively sad career after 1870. It was relegated to use as an oil jetty somewhere in Wales, I believe. But it was restored in the 1980s and is now a museum ship in Portsmouth. So again, it's nice that it had a good recovery from that aspect of its career. All right, so thank you for humoring me with that. Back to local history now. So for this, I had to include at least one ship in a bottle. In this case, it's not entirely clear which ship, either the sailing ship or the tug. I hope you can see it clearly. But in this case, it's really the story of how this particular artifact came to be and how it ended up in our museum that's interesting here. So this ship in a bottle was made by a German prisoner of war at the Angler prisoner of war camp. And this is really a fairly interesting part of our history. So during World War II, a number of POW camps were constructed along the north shore of Lake Superior. These included Red Rock, which is documented extensively in the book Little Third Reich on Lake Superior by Ernest Zimmerman, as well as at Naze and Angler, two camps which are both a little closer to Marathon. These camps were built officially for enemy combatants, but unfortunately they did become used for civilians of non-Canadian descent as well, which is definitely one of the more unfortunate aspects of this history. In any event, the prisoners needed things to do, so they built things like this, and we actually have several of these in our collection. This particular one was given, presumably by a prison guard, to a lumberman who had been working near Marathon after the war. And this lumberman eventually gave it in turn to a young boy who later in life donated it to the museum. Now you can't obviously see this in the camera, but from myself looking at it closely, you can just barely make out the little tiny hinges on the ship masts that of course allow the mast to fold and thus go into the bottle, which really speaks to how intricate and impressive works they are. They really are fascinating. So there were other crafts that were done by prisoners of war as well. Some of these included wooden models of the Bismarck, which of course was the pride of the Kriegsmarine. We have two of these in our collection, both of which were made at the Naze POW camp. There's a story that I've heard that is not 100% confirmed, that one of these was used to hide a radio, which aided a partially successful escape attempt from the Angler camp. But again, this is a story that is not 100% confirmed. It certainly is an interesting story. All right, so one last ship that we're going to focus on is the Fordonian. And this one has been on display. It's actually been moved into our boardroom. Apologies for a lousy photo of it. We had hoped that we could take our camera into the room where it is, but it didn't quite work out in the time that we had. So regular visitors to our lectures or other events that we have here probably have seen this ship. It's been in this room, this very room, for many decades. It's a fairly large model, probably about 5 feet, 4 or 5 feet. It's been against the wall, but again, we've moved it to our boardroom recently. So this ship was 250 feet long. It was built in Glasgow in 1912. And what makes it interesting is that it was one of the very first, I think it actually was the first ship on the Great Lakes to be powered by diesel engines, which had only been invented several decades earlier. The main advantage of diesel engines, of course, was to save space, and some technical information that I received about the Fordonian indicates that it saves about 33% of space versus a steam engine. But this diesel trend didn't really last long, and diesel engines and ships didn't really take off until after World War II, when they became more reliable. I've read differing accounts of this in some of the sources that I have. Some of them indicate that the Fordonian actually switched back to steam relatively early on in its career, and then reconverted back to diesel later on. presumably because they found that the reliability of diesel engines still wasn't very good. So the ship started its service with the Canada Interlake Line, which later became Canada Steamships Line. This ship was acquired by Patterson Shipping Lines in 1926, and then it was renamed the Yukon Dock, which is a standard way of naming ships that this company used, for instance, the Ont Dock, the Wind Dock, the Hamel Dock, etc. So I'm going to switch to a slide which should show the ship. Give us 1 second on that slide. So this ship, because it was purchased by the Patterson Shipping Company, has of course the local connection. So this company was founded by Norman Patterson, who would later go on to serve in the Canadian 7th. And this company operated a large fleet of ships based in Fort William until 2002. The book Ships of the Patterson Fleet by DeJong describes the fleet in clear detail, including the Yukon Dock, and it's available through our gift shop. So while we're on the subject of models on display, it's also worth mentioning the lovely model that we have on the second floor of the SS Assiniboia, which along with its sister ship, the Keewatin, was the pride of the Canadian Pacific Fleet, sailing between Port Arthur and Port McNicoll, Ontario. The Assiniboia is no longer around, but the Keewatin has been restored as a museum ship in Port McNicoll after being in Michigan for many years. So once again, I am complete well ahead of schedule. I keep not slowing down my voice enough. But anyways, I can open it up to questions now. But before I do that, I'd just like to say thank you to all those who are more knowledgeable of these subjects than I am, who have assisted me in researching some of these ships. And again, like I said, this is just scratched the surface of the models that we have in our collection. I haven't even been able to really touch on Port Arthur and Fort William's fascinating shipbuilding history, which is another major theme in the development of the lake as well. But in the time we had, although of course I have more time, I've done the best I could to find a representative of some of the types of ships that are interesting to our history. So I will do my best to answer questions. I am not, of course, a maritime historian, but if I can't answer, I will be sure to follow up with you later and make sure I can answer your questions later on. So thank you again.
Okay, well, thank you, Michael. So we do have, just to remind everyone, as Michael was saying, on the bottom of your screen, you will see an item for Q&A. Please do type in your questions there, and we'll get to them in order. So the first question asked is, do we have any idea of how many ships models are in the collection at the Thunder Bay Museum?
Yeah, I didn't actually count. Our collection right now is split between catalog cards and a computerized database. Now, obviously, we're in the process of switching over all of our catalog cards to the computerized database. But without that, it's kind of hard to say because our ship models are split between the database and the catalog cards, and with a little bit of overlap. But based on looking, just sort of looking ballpark, all of our ship models, of course, stored neatly right beside each other in one section of storage. I am going to give a rough guess that we have between 50 and 60 different ship models. So again, I wish I could have featured more, but yeah, that's some of the collection that we have, many of which have local significance, but we do have a number of ones which are just some interesting ships that local craftsmen have built. I believe we have one of the Blue Nose. I'm pretty sure we have one of the Titanic as well. So 50, 60 is my guess.
The next question we have is, what is the scale size of the ship in the bottle that was displayed?
That is a tough one. And again, it's hard to say, of course, because I don't know what ship it is. Perhaps I could figure it out. That's definitely one that I could perhaps at least try to get back to you on. Again, just if you want to email your question to info@thunderbaymuseum.com. It appears to be a fairly large sailing ship, but in any event, the size of the actual bottle, I'm going to say is, let's say the ship hull in the bottle is 3 inches long. So again, that doesn't really answer your question, but the best I could do in the time I have. So thank you.
The next question is, Were the Canadian early explorers involved in ship trading, or where were the Canadian early explorers involved in the ship trading?
I'm guessing we're talking about La Vérendrye, Radisson, and such. That too is. I know certainly they used ships to explore Lake Superior. Obviously, ships had limited utility in exploring Canada beyond Lake Superior. That too is when I can give you a better answer with via email. But I didn't look too much into this because I mostly picked up on this right at the time when the lakes were open to commercial shipping in the late 18th century, when of course the Northwest Company and the XY Company started to become involved. And obviously there's a lot of overlap between these companies. For instance, the XY Company, as I mentioned, was Alexander Mackenzie, the famous explorer, was involved in that company. So definitely there were some involvements with this for sure. So, but again, that too, feel free to email and I can give you a better answer than this right now.
Next question is that are there any blueprints or designs of ships in the museum's collection?
Yes, there are a number of them. I don't have the database in front of me, but there are some really interesting ones, of course. I believe we have ship plans of the Noronic, which was a fairly well-known passenger ship on Lake Superior. I have seen other ones of some of the trawlers that were built in World War I. Apart from that, what else do we have? I'm guessing also we have many dozens of ship plans, if not many hundreds. But that too, again, I'm sorry I keep doing this, but if you send me an email, what I can do is actually just take our catalog and find all the entries that we have for ship blueprints and send them on to you, and you can see if any of them interest you. We do have the capability of scanning them at high res as well, because we have a fairly large format scanner. So.
So the next question is, what are the models typically made from?
So it depends. I mean, wood certainly is used for the majority of them. There are a few of them that we have that are plastic, but definitely wood is the primary material, of course, with wooden masts. I think there's some metal on it as well. I tried to just sort of get into the mechanics of ship build or ship model making rather for this. I didn't have as much time to delve into that as I wanted to. I'm not too familiar with the process of how it's done. But there are a few ship model builders that I'm in touch with, and I hope to ask some of them a little bit more about this, because again, I've really enjoyed this subject and I'd like to learn a little bit more about it. But I would say from the models that I see, wood is definitely the primary medium for these.
Do we have any ships or boats in the collection at the Thunder Bay Museum, or canoes?
Yes. We have both model canoes and actual canoes. We have 2 full-size birch bark canoes, both in our storage. I'm unclear about the history of them too much. I don't have the greatest cataloging information. We actually have a model birch bark canoe that was made by, and I'm now linking back to 2 weeks ago, by Wendell Beckwith, who I discussed 2 weeks ago. He made a model birch bark canoe, and that's in his collection as well. And I could send a picture of that to you if you'd like. So yeah, again, we have both models and full-size canoes. We do not have any Voyager canoes in our collection. Oh, obviously, Wolf Orbital has one.
Question about someone's saying that they've heard about the Thunder Bay Museum once featuring something on shipwrecks.
Yeah, we have a traveling exhibit on shipwrecks. Actually, it's on tour right now. It's presently at the North Bay Museum, obviously closed right now because of everything going on. But if you happen to be in North Bay, after things loosen up a little bit, assuming the timing works out, you can catch up with it. And also, of course, we of course have copies of all the panels that are on display. And I believe the North Bay Museum is actually putting some of the information on their social media because, again, of the shutdown. So you can catch some of the information that we have on shipwrecks on Lake Superior through them. So yes, we do absolutely have that exhibit. And yeah, it's on tour right now. I believe it'll be in Southern Ontario for a bit, and it's going to end up in Manitoba. That is the plan anyway. Again, it's really hard to know how much these plans will change. So,
Are there any books about ships or boats in this region that you could recommend?
I don't know if there's one I can think of about ships just in the region. There's lots of ships books about independent aspects. For instance, we have a number of books about Port Arthur shipbuilding. One in particular that we have in our gift shop. That's a really an excellent resource. Again, talking about some of the fascinating ships that we have that have been built here. There's also plenty of articles in our papers and records on various ships throughout the years. And again, you can find an index to our papers and records on our website. And again, send me an email and I can easily, we have a very convenient index that I can just easily send you all of the various articles that touch on ships in this region. So.
Could just remind everyone, we've got a few more questions in the hopper, but if you do want to ask a question, go to the Q&A section and please do type in your question and we'll answer it in order. So the next question actually has to do with non-photographs and non-models and non-blueprints, but do we have any records in the museum about individuals who worked as part of the shipping industry, lighthouses, other things relating to the ships in general in the industry?
Yeah, when you mentioned lighthouses, the first thing that comes to mind is the diary of Andrew Dick. So he was the lightkeeper at Porphyry Island, which is on Lake Superior. And his diary that we have in our archives, and it's digitized, was the basis for a very popular book, The Lightkeeper's Daughter. And it's a really fascinating account of his life, his family's life, and of course the very difficult life they lived, full of tragedy. As well in this incredibly inhospitable environment. But yeah, our archives contain plenty of links or resources about people who worked, like I said, either in shipbuilding or who were captains of ships. In some cases, we have diaries of people's travels as they went up the lakes towards Fort William and just the various things that they experienced. There's one collection in particular I can think of, I don't recall the name of it offhand, that describes someone's voyage on a ship through the Great Lakes to Port Arthur and just the various things that they experienced. So yeah, plenty of things. And we have our archives are all available on our website in the archives section. They're all listed there. But again, an email to me and I can easily sorry I keep doing this, but I can easily just say, I can recommend some excellent resources to you as well. So.
Another question has to do with shipbuilding specifically. Individuals read or heard that there were military vessels built in the shipyards here. Is that true?
It is. We built a number of trawlers, minesweeping trawlers that were used in World War I. They were called the TRs. They were called TR1, TR2, TR3. We have a number of photos of them in our collection. We have photographs of them. We have some documentation on them as well. They were built by Cancar, if memory serves me correctly. And the other thing that comes to mind is the Inkerman and the Sarasols, which both sank in Lake Superior on their way to be used in the war. So yeah, definitely there were some military ships built here. And the book that we have on Cancar, I think, can definitely describe that in more detail. So.
Another question has to do with, do we have in the museum's collection clothing or items of textiles relating to sailors, military, or otherwise?
I think so, but I don't know too much about it. But what I can do is I can ask, we're actually in the middle of a project to go through our textile collection right now, catalog it, move it to new storage facilities. And in a couple weeks, I believe a month from now, we're going to be featuring a webinar on that project as well. So I'm going to ask the cataloging assistant that we have working on that project to see what she's encountered. And again, I can easily get back to you with some of the things that we found. Undoubtedly, we have naval uniforms in our collections, for sure. I just don't know too much about them offhand.
So another question going back to shipwrecks. Are there any shipwrecks near Thunder Bay?
Oh, dozens, if not hundreds. We actually have a map in our library that shows just the locations of various shipwrecks on Lake Superior. There's really too many to count. Some of the more notable ones, again, the Algoma, which is off of Isle Royal, which isn't too far away. But I'm assuming you're referring to a little closer to here, like for instance, near Thunder Cape or the Welcome Islands. I know that there are a few, there's definitely some in that zone on that map. Very treacherous waters, of course. I don't know them offhand, but definitely there have been some shipwrecks very close to Thunder Bay for sure.
So next question has to do with that. You mentioned the Patterson Line. Is there any materials in the museum that relate to the Patterson family?
We have a number of artifacts that have been donated generously by the Patterson family recently, or over the years, of course. In terms of documentation, I am not sure offhand, apart from, of course, the book that I mentioned earlier about the Patterson fleet. But I'm assuming you're referring more to archival material. That's going to be, I can get back to you on that for sure.
So just a reminder, we've got one more question in the hopper, and then we'll be wrapping things up. So last question that we have, if you do have other questions, please do type them in. We'll get to them right away. But are there any models in the collection of ships that are still sailing?
Well, I know there must be, but I can't think of one. I know we have one of the Blue Nose, and I know the Blue, but I think there have been multiple iterations of the Blue Nose over time. I don't know if the model that we have is of the Blue Nose that exists today. Apart from that, I think so, but I am not 100% sure.
Okay, last call for any questions. Okay, seeing none, I'd like to thank you all for coming out this evening to hear the presentation on the ship models in the Thunder Bay Museum's collection. I'd like to also thank our contributors, particularly our members. Also, the activities of the Thunder Bay Historical Museum Society would not be possible without the City of Thunder Bay, Government of Canada, and the Government of Ontario. And this webinar series would not be also possible without all of them, as well as Lakehead University's Department of History and Technology Services Center. So coming up next week, pleased to announce that next week will be Dr. Mark Burry, who is the 2019 RBC Taylor Prize winner for Best National Nonfiction Book for Bushrunner, The Adventures of Pierre Radisson. He's going to talk about the adventures of Pierre Radisson and specifically the controversy around did Radisson in fact actually come to Northwestern Ontario or not. In the meantime, go to www.thunderbaymuseum.com to check out our online exhibits, our car raffle, and to learn more about the Thunder Bay Historical Museum Society. So once again, thank you, Merci, Chimagwech, and we'll see you all back here next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Enjoy the rest of your